The story of R2. A 6-year journey for this buck. One of the neatest bucks that I've ever seen to walk these mountains, and really any mountains at that. This story, this hunt isn't like your typical video that you'll see. In fact, it doesn't even result in me killing this buck. These are replicas. What this story shows is what a deer can really turn into when he reaches his peak potential and given those years to grow. It also shows, how deer are creatures of habit. It was truly a blessing to watch this buck grow and kind of take note of his habits and see what those deer do to survive. It's quite a journey, so come along with me. I'll kind of narrate and take you through it. The pursuit, everything has been documented, and I wanted to make a video about it and obviously have it result in me getting him in the end, but the story's too cool not to tell, so here it is, the story of R2. It started in 2015. I'd just gotten into high country deer hunting. I was only 18 to 20 years old when I really got into it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had an idea. You had to get high, glass, deer in the velvet, they'd be out in the basins. So I actually was hunting a buck I called Wide Clyde, or Clyde. Turned into an absolute giant buck. That story is a long story in and of itself. But while hunting Clyde, I saw R2. Now, I don't have a lot of great footage because back then, I barely even had a smartphone that worked. I had my little phone scope attachment that I barely knew how to use at the time. I was just getting into everything, like I said, but I do have some posts, thankfully, on my Instagram that I've been able to go through and save and dig up photos of R2 in those early years. So R2 was just a basic 4-point, very clean, maybe 145 to 160 inches tops. A nice buck, but I thought nothing of it at the time hunting the giant I was hunting, which was Clyde. But I just kept note of it, said, hey, there's a good buck, he has potential. Well, 2016, I found myself up there hunting Clyde once again after missing him 3 times the year before. And I saw this buck again, but I noticed he put on an immense amount of inches, maybe 20 to 25 inches. He was hitting my camera somewhat consistently. He was a nice buck. So I remember messaging my friend Devin, who's a big buck killer, and you'll hear about Devin later in the story. And I said, hey, do you want to hunt a 200-inch buck next year? Send him the picture, and he replied, oh, that's a nice buck, but he didn't really know how many inches that buck had put on from the year before. I'm guessing 25 inches that deer put on in 1 year. And knowing he was young, he had the potential to put more on. But I get my pictures of R2, summer, fall, and then I'm on the winter range in December, and I see a buck walking around at first light while I'm glassing, and I was like, man, he looks really familiar. And I'm about 9 miles away from where I'd seen him in the summer, and then I get some phone scope footage of him and I compare it to the trail cam pictures I got, and I'm like, gosh dang, that's that buck. So I knew he made it through the winter. Fast forward, now we're in the summer of 2017. I'm up looking for this buck. It's early, and a lot of the deer haven't even gotten halfway grown yet, but it's always fun to get out and start the scouting season early. Well, I had a hunch of where he was going to be based on my previous years of getting him on trail camera, and sure enough, I turned him up.
What's he looking at? No, there's a badger right above him.
Oh yeah, I see this deer.
2 of them.
He's looking at it.
The one's coming to like sniff him. Another one's sitting up at the den. Look it on the camera.
Yeah.
I think it's going after him. Look.
That's making sure he don't come to his hole. Probably got some babies.
That's pretty funny. Look at that. Now they're both going after him.
There he comes.
Deer's like, what the hell?
What's the matter with you guys? Come back to your hole.
He had a great frame to begin with, and it looked like he was going to add to it this year and grow some extras. That got me super excited. 2017 was going to be a good year. I began the mission of dispersing trail cameras and glassing weekly for this buck. He was hit and miss. He was in a very difficult area, a lot of pine trees, not easy glassing points. not very visible terrain to glass, not glasser friendly. Unfortunately though, after the velvet stripped, he changed up his habits and R2 went missing. It was then this year that I gave him the name R2. I gave him that name because my friend Devin killed a buck a couple years prior, and this buck has the exact same look, the exact same genetics, kickers in the same area, and he called that buck Raddick. So I gave this buck the name Raddick 2 or R2. Anyways, after the velvet stripped, he changed up his habits and became very difficult to locate. So I decided to split the hunting season up between him and some deer that were in a similar area that were a little bit more consistent. Knowing where he wintered though, I found myself back there in January, and I believe it was January 1st. I hiked up the mountain to glass the same area I'd seen him in the winter before. And sure enough, I remember it was about 11 o'clock in the afternoon, and I look up into this high pocket and I see a giant buck. I scramble to get the scope out, zoom in on him, and it's R2, and he's beautiful, hasn't broken a point, just giant. His back forks, I remember that year, were huge, good inlines, and a couple extras. I spent a good amount of time after that trying to glass and locate him to follow him to watch him drop and maybe pick up his antlers, but I couldn't locate him again. We had a decent amount of snow that year, and I'm afraid that he might have moved quite a bit from where I'd seen him that day. Now fast forward, summer of 2018, I find myself yet again up in the same area. I've got the goal to find R2 this year. I put out even more trail cameras in the same spots where I've seen him and a few extra spots where I hadn't seen him. I glass even harder for this buck. It was pretty crazy. He avoided all of the cameras. I got one buck on camera, had the same frame that R2 had always had, the same 4-point frame, but it just looked like he had regressed. He didn't have any extras, looked older. I was disappointed and pretty in disbelief that a buck could lose so many inches in a year. But in the back of my mind, I just held out some hope that maybe R2 was just missing my cameras. Maybe I was just not glassing from the right angle that year, and he was still out there. Come the rut of 2018 in November, I go up and check a camera up in the high country that I left out through the fall. In the middle of the night, this massive buck comes by and just gives me enough in the corner of the screen for me to verify it was R2. He looked huge. He had a split on his main beam, extras. Somehow that buck had avoided me all year. My trail cameras, my days of scouting, he avoided me. So I knew he was alive. I knew he was still in the area where I had been hunting. Just somehow I'm missing him. Fast forward, winter of 2018. I've got my trail cameras out, all in the winter range. I'm gonna capture this buck. I'm gonna get his sheds this year. Well, he shows up, and unfortunately, he has busted off his entire antler on one side and all of his extras on the other. Don't know what buck it was that did this to him. Don't know when it happened, but sometime in November to January. It was heartbreaking to see him broken like that. So there went my motivation to find his sheds. I mean, finding a 4-inch antler, pretty much impossible, and then the other side being as broken as it was. You know, hindsight, I should have spent more time anyways just to pick that one side up, but I was pretty unmotivated to find that broken set, so I kind of let him be for the winter and planned to find him, hunt him, and get him in 2019. So summer of 2019 comes around, and you know, I'm pretty confident I know this buck about as well, if not better, than anybody. There hasn't been anybody hunting him. One guy, that one who ended up killing him, actually saw him one time. I think it was in 2017, and it was early, and that was it. Well, 2019 comes, and there's another deer in the area, big 3x4 that has grown year after year. I think for 3 years I saw him, and each year he just got bigger and bigger, a big whitetail framed buck. Well, here's the crummy part about social media. I remember I posted a video of him, and I had no intentions of hunting this buck because I knew R2 was in the area. Posted a video of him on social media, and a guy that had seen my truck up there and saw my post put 2 and 2 together and was intrigued about the buck. So he went up, actually seeing that, found the buck, ended up killing him. Well, in running cameras and being up there hunting that buck, R2 happened to slip up, go by one of his cameras. That sparked that hunter's knowledge and interest to stay up there and obviously hunt R2. So 2019, that's how that started off and went. Unfortunately, I ran my cameras, I glassed, I hunted, I couldn't get him. I remember, I believe it was the week before the hunt, the week of the opening season, I saw him on the face that he ends up dying on, and he was amazing. Looked huge and extras everywhere. He'd hit a few of my trail cameras, and I was pretty confident that I had a good chance to get that buck this year. As a lot of you guys know, I had a job with Hush. Unfortunately, when it comes to this, we traveled a lot. So I missed the first 7 or so days of the opening hunt. So wherever he was come that first week, it didn't matter. I wasn't able to hunt him. R2 would typically not be very consistent in September. So I didn't put a ton of time into him then, a little bit, but not much. He didn't hit my cameras. And the days I did go up there, I didn't see him. October though, based on my years of knowledge, I knew was gonna be a hot month. And sure enough, R2 started hitting my cameras every week. Every few days he was hitting my cameras. I had him pretty well pegged. The unfortunate part was I was out of town. The days I could go up, I didn't see him, and the days that I couldn't be there, he was hitting my cameras. So a little bit of bad luck there for the month of October. So that leads me to the winter of 2019-2020. It's now the 4th year I know where this buck winters. I haven't picked his sheds up once. I know where he's gonna be. This year is the year I'm gonna pick up his sheds. I show up first day looking for him. The first buck I see is just a giant bodied buck up on the hillside. So I'm hiking up and I already know it's R2. I sit down, throw the scope up, and there he is sitting under a pine tree. And he's clean, not broken, looking good, looking healthy, by far the biggest body, the cleanest cape on the winter range. So I'm confident that he's gonna make it and go into next season, but I'm also confident I'm getting his sheds this year. From that day on, I watched him almost every single day through the end of December into January. My buddy Connor, he would go up on days I couldn't go, or he would tag along with me some of the days and we'd watch him and in just anticipation, waiting for one of those antlers to drop. And that was really cool to watch that buck and see his habits. You know, there'd be a few deer up on the hill up higher, but then R2, 9 times out of 10, was tucked away really low by himself in the brush. Another interesting thing is this buck wasn't far from a road. You know, there's roads in every main canyon on this unit, and you know the deer migrate down these canyons as the winter comes and the snow gets higher. Well, R2 a lot of times was only 20 to 50 yards off of this main road. A lot of areas you might think, well, there's deer by roads all the time, but there's not roads anywhere. These mountains are high country peaks, and there's only foot trails to get you up in there. In the main canyons, there are roads in the very bottoms, but you couldn't see them. The mountain and the brush was so thick that if you were, you know, around the road or ground level with him, you couldn't see him. You had to park and then hike up the opposing side of the canyon to look down or look across in on him. R2's been so consistent within the same 500 to 100 yards every day. Well, we can't find R2 anywhere. Connor and I are sitting up on the hill trying to figure out where the heck this buck went. So we start glassing around, and I look down the canyon and I could see 2 deer tracks, 2 sets of deer tracks side by side going down the canyon, and then they wrap around a ridge and out of sight. So we get down to our truck and we start driving down the road, and it's almost dark. we're driving, we get down about a mile down the road, and we can still see these deer tracks kind of just following the road off and on. We look over to our left and I'm like, hey, there's 2 bucks. We look at each other at the same time, and he yells, it's R2 with 1 horn. You know, we're yelling, holy shit, I can't believe it. Like, there he is right there. R2 is standing there with only his right side, a bloody pedicle. This antler's gone. And he's only 20 yards off of the road feeding with the other buck we called Split Ear, who was already shed. So we pull over right there and we're like, oh my gosh, what the heck? We get out of the truck and, you know, we walk over off to the side and set this tripod up, and we're just sitting there filming him. And gosh, we're only 80 to 120 yards away, somewhere in there, from the buck. He's just watching us chewing on this little buckbrush mahogany. He gets up, kind of works up the hill, looking at us, and then he gets a fair distance away, and then he calms down and he just goes back to eating right at dark. So we know he packed that antler till last light. Good news is he's away from where this antler's lying. We're excited. We don't want to wait because who knows who saw him, who's going to go in there. The buck was right off of the road. We get a wild hair to go in there that night and look for the antlers because it's got to be right there. He had a bloody pedicle. We got our snowshoes on. We're hiking around, and I'm following all of the tracks that I think is possible. Connor's split up. He's following all the tracks that we think can be possible. And after a couple hours of looking, we can't find the antler. So we come back the next day, pick up on our tracks, and we keep walking and walking. We can't find him. We see R2, he still has his right side. So we have him bedded. He's just sitting up in this high timber patch. He'd gained maybe 1,000 feet in elevation overnight and was hanging out by himself. So we have him located. We go looking for the antlers. Midday finally comes, and I've walked anything that I think is possible for him to shed on for tracks. And I'm like, you know what? He had to shed in this ditch. That's where his tracks came from that led to where we saw him with 1 antler. I'm gonna go walk in there again on my same tracks. I walk into the brush. 3 feet is about all you can see because you got oak brush hitting you in the face. And what did I stumble onto? This antler. In the dark, I had stepped on the antler and pushed it down into the snow. So I call Connor up. I'm like, dude, I found it. Get down here and let's pick it up. Looks fake almost, just sitting there.
Dude!
Dude, that's my tracks, is it not?
Yeah!
I must have been looking down here and looked right over it.
Oh my gosh!
And dude, and then I walked right here too. I found fresh blood right here today on the way in that I couldn't see at night. And usually that's like that'll tell you like,
dude,
there's a shed. And sure enough, I'm coming through this thick stuff, following all the old tracks, and here it is.
Dude, me and Martin been calling each other back and forth today. I've been glassing the buck. He's still got 1 horn. I've been staying on him. Martin's been walking all the tracks.
Dude, is my boot track right
That's
here.
From last night.
I mean, it was probably just kind of hidden with this branch.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Right above that. Dude, Connor, I don't want to pick it up almost. It's so cool. R2, I've been after this buck for 5 years. I didn't get him this year, so hopefully next year, but finally have a shed off of him. Connor and I have been watching him for a month now.
Dude. Oh my word.
Chocolate brown.
Chocolate.
Bladed out of his mind. Like, that beam is so bladed.
Dude, that is an epic horn, dude. That is a giant monarch. Look at that.
Pretty cool. Base to him. Nice eye guard.
Dude, she's a freaking gnarly buck, dude.
So cool.
They don't get better than that. I mean, especially up here, dude. Like, this is so epic, dude. Chocolate. As chocolate as they come.
We come back the next day in hopes to locate R2 shed again. This day we can't see him. We're glassing, picking apart this entire face. We can see a lot of the area that he was hanging out in, and we can't see him. What I did notice though is a couple of other bucks, one pretty nice 4-point that were in the area. We saw them get up that evening and they moved and completely migrated out of the canyon. We watched them go about 3 miles that night, just on their own and on a mission to migrate. So it worried me that maybe R2 did the same. The rest of that spring, I went in there and I hiked every deer track I could find, every deer trail, every patch of brush I could find. And after putting down well over 50 miles in this small area, I couldn't find his antler. So the mission was out again to find R2, and that we did. Went up into the high country early. I was with the Connor, glassing a big North Face. We glass him up. We're kind of far away, but we could tell it's R2. His body completely dwarfs this other buck that he's with. Antlers are big. He's got that wide flared out frame, his big front forks, and you can see he's got knobs growing everywhere. He's gonna grow a bunch of trash, which is this set right here. So we're excited. We're like, he's back, and he's gonna be giant. Glassing was very difficult because he could be in 4 different little basins, and the one he spent the most time in was extremely thick. So most days I knew I wasn't going to see him when I was glassing, because you just had to pick the right basin, have the right angle, and have him be out on top of that. That's why I ran my trail cameras also, and I was able to get him on a few of those. It was kind of the same deal as 2019. I got him on camera a handful of times, and I believe I saw him a couple more times in that time frame, but just nothing where I could get on him. Going into the month of October, I knew that buck was going to be consistent, because the year prior and the year prior to that, the deer was very consistent on my cameras in these certain areas. October, I knew where I needed to be. I knew where I needed to focus. Unfortunately, again, another busy month. I was gone a lot. I believe I went to New Mexico twice. I had an Idaho trip, and then one other trip. It might have been Arizona that I went to. November came, and I actually caught COVID, and that was during the first week to week and a half of the month. So I was at home. I had to miss a trip with Hush. Mid-November comes, I find myself going up there and glassing, and I think I made 3 or 4 trips up there, couldn't find the buck. And I'm just thinking, man, he's up here somewhere. What is the angle that I haven't been glassing? It dawns on me, 2019, I got across the canyon and I saw him. And I was like, you know what? I need to glass that face again. So I go up there and I get my buddy Devin. We get suited up, we get on our Baku e-bikes, and we bike in a good chunk of the way, and then we have to hike in the next half of the way. The snow is deep. It's late November at this point. It's cold. We're talking negative to single-digit temperatures at first light up there. I got Devin up on the other side of the canyon where I used to glass from, and then I was going to just go up and be ready on the side that the buck is hanging out on. We get up in there, and there's a few other guys. Heartbreaker already, because, you know, when you have a buck like that, it's awesome to just have him to yourself, to play your own game and just go in on him at the right time and know you have him to yourself. But it's public land, so obviously that's going to happen from time to time. If you remember from what I said about 2019, about how some people found out about him, well, I had a hunch it was going to be them. We're glassing and we're seeing deer at first light. I look up on the hill just across from me, and there's R2. I mean, I'm probably 300 yards away, so not too far. And he's looking great. Sun's hitting him. He's up there in full rut mode, pushing does around. And I say to myself, this is it. Like, this is the time we're going to get R2. That's all I've been asking for, is an opportunity to see him. This is our best chance we're going to get R2. Well, I'm dipping down in, and to get to there, I had to go across this little flat meadow and then up a face. It's a pretty common route to take to get up this route. I've done it for years. The last couple of years, there's been a ground blind there with hay or bait out and a trail camera. So I knew that it was there. I'd seen it already going in 2020, but nobody's ever been in it. I always thought to myself, whose blind is this? But they're never in it when I'm up here. I want to pause here and put it out there. A lot of you have heard this story, and from my perspective, I've heard it get twisted by other people, by the people that were up there on the mountain that day, that week. And from this point forward, I'm just telling the story how I witnessed it and how it went. And I know it's a far contrast from what I've heard. I just cruise by the ground blind and I'm going straight up after R2. Well, I get about 50 yards past it and I hear psst, psst, psst. Hey, I look behind me and somebody's in the ground blind and they're motioning for me to come over to them. I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got a 230-inch buck up the hill. I don't know who this guy is. I also don't want to tell them, hey, I'm going after this giant buck, because they might not have any idea about this buck. I just tell them no, and I motion no, I'm going to go up here. And I just turn and go, because deer in the rut, you don't have time to waste. A lot of these deer move a lot, and a buck like this, obviously if he's out feeding and out in an open spot, you're not going to sit around. I get into position and I'm waiting. I hear the ground blind open a couple 100 yards below me. I'm sitting parallel with the deer, hoping that they're going to come in towards me, and this guy cruises up the ridge behind me and then gets above me. So that's when I start to think, okay, what is this guy doing? Because he was in his ground blind, he wanted me to come over, and now he's cruising to get above me. So I thought maybe he might have an idea. So some time went on. I let about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour pass, and the deer hadn't made it to me. Devin's spotting for me, and he says the deer have just held up. They're just sitting in the same spot. Whoever it was that had cut out of the ground blind and went up to the top had now came back down towards their ground blind. So trying to avoid it, now knowing somebody was in the ground blind, I was trying to think what my game plan could be. In that time, I looked up behind me and I could see another guy up on the same hillside as me, glassing over towards the deer. So now I knew there was two people in the area hunting probably this buck, because I'm sure whoever was up on the hillside could have a visual of this deer. Anyways, midday comes, the buck disappears into the trees, and Devin's having a hard time seeing him. I thought, well, I'm gonna get high, go west as well, and I bet you that deer is going to cut uphill at some point. As I was working west, I saw the hunter that was in this ground blind yet again get out and start working that bench moving west. So I worked my way west and got into a good position where it looked like deer would come up through this draw. Sat down, told Devin where I was at, had him watch, and sure enough, not long after sitting there, I catch movement in the trees below me. Next thing I know, I see this rack coming up through the trees. It's R2 pushing a doe with a 2-point behind him, and he's working straight up towards me. So I tell Devin, I say, Devin, look below me, R2 is coming towards me, I gotta go. Between me and him, there's about 50 to 60 yards of opening, and I'm right at the top of that opening. I get my rangefinder out and I range him, and he's about 72 yards away. But as he pushes that doe up right to the edge of that opening and then starts paralleling and side hilling the mountain. And so I range him and I want to get a shot off, but he won't stop moving. It's kind of that thing bucks do during the rut where they take a few steps pushing that doe, might stop just for that half second to range, and then they're moving again. So I just continued paralleling the buck along this hillside right back to where they started the day. So the deer, it looked like we're gonna make a big circle. I backed off, went on the back side of the mountain in snow this deep, and decided to do a little bit of a circle and then come straight down that spine on the deer. I get down, start making a great stalk on him, pull up my rangefinder. I can see all of the doe. I could shoot the doe if I wanted to. I'm 50 yards away from her. What I can see from R2 is like what you can picture from a shoulder mount of a deer on a wall. I can see from about right here up on him. And all he has to do is take the doe's place, and I have a 50-yard shot downhill at him. The snow is very crunchy down there, and I could hear that hunter walking around. And the doe, the buck, they could all hear that, and they kind of fixated on it and didn't want to move. The doe would look up my way off and on, so I couldn't move. It was pretty open in between me and the deer, so moving wasn't really an option. I just needed the deer to move, and I was in a good position. I could see to my left and up the mountain, I could still see the other guy from earlier. He hadn't moved. So I started to put it together, and I realized this guy wasn't hunting this deer, he was spotting for the guy that was down in the bottom. I mean, heck, at 50 yards, I pulled the rangefinder down, and this rack, I could see him just moving around. He was facing this way. I'd see him turn like this and then look down the canyon like this. But I look down a little bit to my left and below me, and I see who I now know who it is, but I see the ground blind guy. And he's 50 yards below me, and the deer are looking right at him. It's public land. Everybody has the right to hunt. But I know that this guy has a spotter, and that guy was watching me, and he saw me next to these deer this entire time. He was nowhere near the deer to start with. Anyways, he pops out right below me, right next to, the deer as well. And the deer fixate on him. He pulls back his bow. I'm sitting there like, you gotta be kidding me. Thankfully, they had enough, instinct to them to spin, take off, and run. And they disappear into the thick bottoms of the canyon, and it gets dark. So the next day we show up, and in the parking lot I run into the hunters that were up there. They tell me, I had no idea you were even up there, we didn't even know. That's the story they give me. And I take it for what it is. I'm like, whatever. Well, the buck doesn't show that day. Another day goes by, and Devin and I are heading up in there, and we have the deer to ourselves. Nobody's up there. So we go in and glass up R2, and he's up on this highest peak. Game plan is I'm gonna get up on the spine of the highest ridge, drop off the backside into the north slope and in the snow that's hip deep, and get up above the buck and then come down on him. Buck was up in the pocket. I'd seen him cross for a couple years now. The buck, sure enough, goes up into the Quakies. I sneak over, and I'm now onto the spine of the ridge where I could see down into these Quakies. Snow's a little crunchy, so I have to be careful, and I choose to sit down.
He's just over the top of this ridge, maybe 50 yards just on that side. This is where he's been all summer, or at least part of it in the fall.
There's a 4-pointer, a doe, and him. The 4-pointer comes out into the opening, and I could see R2, and I could see the doe just into the Quakies enough where I can't shoot. So I have to sit down in the snow, and to avoid being skylined, I lay down in the snow, and I'm laying on my back. And R2, once again, just like the other day, won't break that opening. He's staying just in those trees, just enough where I can't see him to get a shot. And the wind swirls and goes down to this 4-pointer who spins, looks at me, and decides he doesn't like what he smells, and he gets out of there. They go down this face and into the thick bottom, and out of sight for the day. Now comes the final day of the hunt. It's November 30th, and we get talking to the other hunters again, and we reflect back on the day where I had the buck at 50 yards waiting on him to just take a couple more steps, and he got blown out from me. This is where I took note that their story kind of changed, and I became skeptical, because originally they said they had no idea I was even there. Then the next time the conversation was brought up, they said, "Oh, I thought you were 150 yards away, not 50 yards away." So I thought to myself, well, which was it? Was I there, or was I not there? Was I 150 yards away, or what was it? Because I was there to hunt, because I was there to enjoy the experience, I didn't get into anything, but that definitely rubbed me the wrong way, because I began to feel like they knew I was there the whole time, right on the buck. We know this is our last chance, so Devin and I hit the trail again. We get up there, first light's coming, it's freezing cold. I've got frost coming down my beard, froze to my face. I get up to my glassing point and I look back, I see somebody sitting in where Devin had been sitting. So I radio Devin, I said, "Hey, is that you?" Devin says, "No, I'm sitting lower on the ridge than where I did the day before. They've sent somebody up where I've been having you sit." And so that was a little frustrating because, nobody had been sitting there glassing from that vantage except Devin up until they saw Dev there. So I look up, and in the same open high peak he was at, a couple days before, I see R2. I do my same plan. I cruise the flat, head up the face, and I hit the ridge line faster than I've ever done in the 5-6 years that I've hiked this ridge. I don't know where anybody else is at. and B, who knows what this deer is going to do. And Devin tells me it looks like they're going to take the same path into the Quakies like they did the day before. I get down and I get in a position where the animals have been bedding, and they're slowly making their way but on trail to come right to me. I get radioed from Devin that the other hunter that's been up there is on the spine of the ridge right behind me. Not long after that, Devin tells me, hey, they're kind of looking up your way. In that situation, my wind was good. It was blowing uphill. The deer couldn't see me. So I don't know if they saw the hunter that was behind me, they decided to leave, or if they just somehow got a wild hair up them that they wanted to go elsewhere. But the deer spun, they turned, they went down into the canyon bottom. The other hunter races down the ridge to my right and below me and gets down level with the deer before I had an opportunity to move. I was faced with a tough situation. Do what they did, push down and do my own thing and get on the deer, even though he's down there with the deer now. Or do I just kind of sit back and try to play it safe and sit a different route? There was a pine tree that R2 was bedded around with some does. I got about 100 yards from that pine tree, and with deer in between me and R2, I kind of had to hold tight for the afternoon. As late afternoon comes, we know this buck's going to get up and move at some point. There's a good chunk of deer in there and a couple other bucks. So R2 was on defense. He had to kind of keep bucks fended off and then push his does and worry about them at the same time. But as time went on, it started to kind of become clear to me that he wasn't going to push up my direction. So I remember getting on the phone with Devin saying, hey, like, should I just move in on this buck? I remember saying, man, like, it happened to me. Like, somebody just moved in on the buck when I was on him. This is our last chance. Should I just move in on the deer? Kind of debating on that. He was just like, maybe just hold tight and see what happens. And we've now entered the last 45 minutes of light, half hour. I decide I better drop down and get a little bit closer just to give myself an opportunity if he does come up my direction. But it's starting to sink into me as I watch the sun drop that this buck isn't going to give me an opportunity. If anybody's going to get an opportunity, it's the other hunter if I stay put. It took a lot for me because I knew, hey, if I go in there, I'm either going to get this buck or I'm going to blow him out of there, and I know where to find him in the winter and get his antlers. And hindsight, I wish I had done that, but I didn't want to be the guy that kind of effed up everybody else's hunt. And I hear on the radio, R2's out and the other hunter is moving in on him. At that point, my heart sank. So I sat down, and after, maybe 10-15 minutes of excruciating silence, piercing silence, nothing coming through on the radio, I hear that the hunter is close, he's within range, and he sees the buck. And seconds later, I hear he shot, he hit him, buck's down, buck's dead. One dream, 6 years. Watching this buck progress, grow, learning the mountain. This buck is essentially what led me to having a passion for high country mule deer hunting. This is really the buck, him and Clyde, that kicked it all off. I mean, I was 20 years old, just getting into it when I started hunting, and he just got killed right from under me. I'll never forget how your stomach just drops, your heart drops. It wasn't the way I'd envisioned for 6 years it going down. It was over. I wasn't far, maybe only 150 yards. I was the first one out of the group of guys to meet up with the hunter and congratulate him. I didn't film or anything because it wasn't my story to tell at that point. It wasn't my moment to have, so I don't have any footage, but I do have some pictures holding the buck. Help the other hunter get some pictures and kind of live out his moment. And from there, Devin and I just hit the trail with empty backpacks, frozen. Poor Devin has been sitting on that north slope for a whole week for me. We left the mountain that day, that last day of the hunt, with nothing. Sometimes it doesn't always go the way that you envision it, and this is one of those stories where that's what happened. It wasn't from a lack of effort. There's so much that I've learned from this buck that I'll be able to put into hunting you know, in future years. It wasn't until maybe the last year and a half of hunting him that I actually felt like I knew what I was doing up there on the mountain, from winter range to picking up their sheds to watching them in the fall and summer and their different habits. Everything was learned from this buck. Something I'll remember forever is pursuing R2. Hope you guys enjoyed that. It's a little bit longer, but it's a 6-year story that I felt like needed to be shared. I've been sitting on this footage forever. I felt like it was a good time to pay tribute and tell R2's story the way it needed to be told.